Good afternoon, good evening, welcome along. Inspire and be inspired. It's another of our motivational conversations and life hack talks. Tuesday, live and direct from the Costa Blanca. It is just after 8 o'clock my time, 7 o'clock for most of you guys in the UK. Thank you for being here. Today we have a very important conversation. As you can see from the graphic, we're going to be discussing domestic abuse support, and the tagline for the project that we're going to be focusing on is because every woman has the right to know their worth and be free from the cycle of domestic abuse. Now, before I go to my guest for today, I just want to say a special thank you out to Mr. Rob Farrell, who was very generous a few weeks ago with helping out the stream, and you can find the link on how you can get involved as well as we progress. We are going to be answering a lot of deep questions, and I know a lot of people are going to be coming and joining us after the event and watching the recording back, so thank you for being here. Without further ado, let me go over to my live guest, and I say good evening and welcome to Dawn Munroe. Hi Dawn, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine, Andy. Thank you so much for having me on to talk about an issue that I'm really passionate about. So yeah, I'm great. I'm really grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, I'll start off by saying thank you to Paulette as well, because I think it was Paulette who may have shared a link to what it is that
Mm,
you're doing, and it came at the just at the perfect time, really. These are conversations that I've been having over the course of the last few months, and people might think, well, why is Wardy talking about domestic abuse? Well, the thing is, it's something that I know is affects a lot of people, and some of the statistics that I know you're going to share later on will be quite surprising for many, many people. So let's start from the beginning, I guess, and find out how you got into this role and exactly what it is you do. And the floor is yours. Tell me how we start this conversation.
yeah. Well, I myself have lived experience of domestic abuse. So as a child, I was subjected to domestic abuse. I saw some horrific domestic abuse. And which resulted in like homelessness, being in refuge. It affected my relationships, it affected my education and certain opportunities, my health, everything really. And the type of person I am, I'm quite resilient and quite resistant.
Okay.
So I decided that I wanted to go into social work. At the time, my boyfriend was in a infamous children's home I'm from Nottingham, in Nottingham, and I decided I didn't like what I saw in that children's home. So at 15, made that decision. I was going to become a social worker.
At 15,
So
did you say, at the age of
at
15?
15,
Right,
yeah, I
okay.
decided, no, I'm going to change the world for children and young people in residential care. And I didn't end up in residential care, but I still ended up being a social worker. So at 15, I was like, the local school I went to, I grew up in a really deprived area of Nottingham. Some people might know it, St Anne's. And my local school was basically a dumping ground for a lot of the children from the estates. And so there wasn't a lot of kind of aspiration in the school to achieve and do well. So I literally left school with a bunch of GCSEs, no grades A to C. I was just like, oh, I've passed my GCSEs. This is great. Nobody ever explained to me, well, it's better if you get A's, C's, and B's and C's. And so off I went to college because I was determined I was going to be a social worker. And at school, they told me, go and work in the hair salon. Not saying there's anything, I love hairdressers. They didn't kind of push me in the direction I wanted to go. Luckily, there was a youth club, Russell Youth Club. It's still there today. And the youth workers there, one of them was a careers officer and basically told me what I needed to do. So off I went to college because my parents just didn't have the knowledge around education. My dad's from Jamaica. My mum didn't achieve in the education system. So they just didn't have that understanding of what I needed to do. So fortunately, this youth worker kind of guided me. And I just think the type of person I am is kind of the skills, the knowledge that I come with from the streets really is something that really helped me in my trade, in my profession. So I was one of the youngest people to in my course, in my class. I was 21, studying my diploma in social work at university. And Paulette, that's where Paulette comes in. Paulette, amazing woman, she was my practice teacher. So I was placed in the St Anne's Family Centre, which is not there anymore, for my social work placement, and spent some time there, getting experience of working with children and families in child protection. So yeah, then I qualified, and I noticed a lot of the cases I was working at the time, there was a lot of domestic abuse, and that just continued throughout my journey in social work. A lot of the cases, somewhere whether it's intergenerational, there would be aspects of domestic abuse in those cases, but that was never really something we delved into. We might touch on that, but it was just, oh, they've suffered domestic abuse. So yeah, off I went. I did a lot of community jobs. I stayed kind of true to St Anne's. I just keep gravitating back to that area, and worked as a youth worker, working with young people in gangs, disrupting them from that and kind of gearing them towards employment and education. And then I went back into social work when a lot of the funding kind of dried up, because there's always jobs in social work. And I was just like gobsmacked that nothing had really changed. And again, a lot of the cases, I'd say like 80% of the cases I was working on, there was domestic abuse elements of that. So by this stage as well, I have to say, as an adult, I started to experience domestic abuse myself in my own intimate relationships. So I think as a child growing up and not being shown boundaries, healthy boundaries in relationships, I kind of came with some baggage, and then was accepting unacceptable behavior in my own relationships. So I was getting more and more passionate about this topic, because I was like, I didn't even understand really that I was in an abusive relationship. And I was working with families who were suffering from domestic abuse. And sometimes I'd go out on visits and I'd be like, hey, I'm experiencing that myself. But it was really difficult for me to kind of differentiate from what was going on with me in my personal life to what was going on with people I was trying to help.
Is that because it was normal? It was kind of normalized to you to some aspect?
It was definitely, yeah. And I think a lot of denial, a lot of shame, a lot of guilt. And I'll talk a bit about gaslighting later on, but a lot of the times when I would like try and talk to the person I was with at the time, it would just be like, no. And so I was just really doubting myself. And I remember one time picking up the phone to phone a domestic abuse helpline, and I was trembling. I was terrified, and I couldn't make the call. I was literally so scared to face up to what I was actually experiencing. I just couldn't understand what I was going through. And so the more I looked into it, the more I researched, the more I read, the more I spoke to people and started to open up to my friends, and get some advice and suggestions. And that's when I started, the penny started dropping, and I was like, I've got to do something about this. And it was so difficult. We when we talk about domestic abuse, we victim blame a lot. So we'll say, why doesn't she just leave? It's so difficult to get out of an abusive relationship. And the conversation needs to be turned around to, why doesn't he stop? Or why doesn't the perpetrator, because it's not all the time males, why doesn't the perpetrator stop? It's always focused on the victim taking responsibility for that perpetrator's behavior. So I just decided I'm going to go and work at Women's Aid. So I got a job as a team manager, managing 3 different services in Nottingham, and that I stayed there for 3 years, and I realised there was so many gaps in the services available for women. I'm quite a holistic person, and I think just explaining what I just have about my own journey, I realised that in terms of the length of recovery, from the trauma of domestic abuse. A lot of the services are short to medium term, so they offer really up to 12 weeks worth of support, which just is not, it just doesn't even touch the side. Like, I've been out of my abusive relationship for say 4 years, and I still am recovering. I still have the effects of that trauma. It's psychological. It's something that you can be triggered at the drop of a hat. So 12 weeks just isn't enough for some victims and some survivors. It is. Some people are just like really resilient and just like, no, don't want to think about it again, don't want to ever talk about it, and get on with it. Whereas some people, it's not that easy. So I just felt like one size service does not fit all. The other aspect as well is that the company, the community interest company that I've set up with 2 other directors, Marsha Brown, and the other one's kind of secret at the minute. And Marsha was a team leader at Women's Aid with me, and we both left and decided to set up Bambuuu, and to offer a service to Black women and women of colour, because I'm sure you can agree, and the viewers, Andy, you know, when we go foreign, we look for things, we want to feel like we belong a little bit, and we'll look for things that we recognize and understand, whether that's talking the same language, or, you know, when I've been to Spain, I might have like chips with my breakfast or something. It's like there'll be something British I need to do to just get a bit of feeling at home. So
a comfort.
Yeah, comfort. So what we realized was some of these services for domestic abuse were really struggling to engage Black women, women of colour, lesbian, gay women. So we was just like, hold on a minute, there's something not right. And when we kind of delved a bit deeper and dived in, it was literally like the training that we receive as domestic abuse support workers is very Eurocentric. So, for example, if you know, when you go to Women's Aid, you get a safety plan, and a lot, just as standard, it will say call the police, which is definitely 100% the right thing to do. But for a Black woman, that might be a little bit more difficult. There might be particular barriers there than, say, for a white woman who's not experienced racism from the police or a housing officer or whatever. So what we say at Bambuuu is we are a service for every woman, but we're specialising in supporting Black women and women of colour who are experiencing domestic abuse, and we are helping them to kind of bang down these barriers that they're facing, because they're not, a lot of the women are not engaging with the traditional domestic abuse services. So that's kind of how Bambuuu was born. So that's kind of a bit of a roller coaster ride to.
It's great, a very noble cause, and a very interesting story how you got to there. Intriguing to sit and listen to that. And while I've been listening, we have been getting people joining us. I just want to say to the people who are joining and commenting, Dawn is actually wanting to focus on the conversation, so she's not actually reading the comments at this moment in time, but you will be coming back and reading all of the comments, and you'll be replying to people after we've had the talk, won't you, Dawn, as well? I will bring up any points that people make. We've got a few people, as always, because it's an interactive conversation and I like to make people feel part of the conversation. So I'll say hi to Selena. Now I'm gonna actually slaughter that name. You're gonna hate me. Double barreled name begins with Navai. How am I pronouncing?
Nevaeh.
Please repeat that for me.
Nevaeh Janae.
Nevaeh Janae. Forgive me for getting that wrong. Giving a big strength sign to Cassandra, to Cliff, also to Paulette as well. So thank you guys for being here. So you've given us the backstory. And I asked the question at the beginning of the stream, and people who are watching can actually answer a poll. And I've said that, let me just see if I can activate this. It's not going to work. Basically saying, do you know anyone directly who's been affected by domestic abuse? And I'm fairly certain that it's going to be in the high figures. Everyone's going to relate to that, aren't they? So we will get to some of those statistics, because I read some quite shocking statistics on your website. Tell us about all the different forms of domestic abuse.
Yeah, so there's typically we say there's like 5 forms of types of domestic abuse. So there's sexual abuse, there's emotional, psychological, economical, and verbal. I can't remember which ones I've said now. Psychological, sexual, economical, emotional, and physical.
Right. Okay.
When you're doing something all the time and somebody asks you, you're like, huh?
And you question
yeah.
you question yourself. What?
Yeah, it feels a bit like a quiz. So yeah, we kind of we look in general, in the general kind of domestic abuse sector. That's what we would say are the types of domestic abuse. And I know some people probably would have heard coercion and control, gaslighting, because they're things that have been kind of highlighted in the media. We've just had the Domestic Abuse Act go through, which just took a few years. It's took longer than we thought. And I think because of COVID, that's put pressure on like the government, and it's caused some kind of delays. But lots of new things have been happening. So we've got like a domestic abuse commissioner now who's there for survivors and victims of domestic abuse. And they're kind of highlighting the types of abuse as well. So a lot of I think when I was growing up, like domestic abuse was so much more accepted. It was seen as a physical thing. So it's like nobody really cared if you got into an argument or was verbally attacked or psychologically abused or economically abused. Nobody kind of saw that as domestic abuse way back. It was literally, where's the marks? That's what people wanted to say. And I think even sometimes women or victims, survivors would present with injuries, but it wouldn't be kind of bad enough. So unless someone's got a broken bone or something like that. Whereas today, it's not about that. We don't look at it just from a physical point of view. Domestic abuse is so much more than that. And it does include like forms of like gaslighting, which is, I don't know whether any of the viewers might have seen it. It comes from an old movie called Gaslighting, and it's a black and white movie. And the victim is a woman who's got amazing fashion sense, and she lives in this house, and the lights are the energy is gas, and her husband goes to the house next door, which is empty, and he keeps turning the gas down so the lights go off and on, and he just does things like that all the time, and he just leads her to believe that she's mentally ill. And that's where the term comes from. So it's literally somebody encouraging you to self-doubt and telling you something hasn't happened when it has happened. So that, and we hear that all the time. Oh, he's gaslighting me, or somebody's gaslighting me. So I think that's been quite a big topic in the last few years. And people are getting more of an understanding of domestic abuse and what it entails, economical abuse as well. When I was growing up, my mum had a little cleaning job and my dad was the breadwinner. It's not like that today. And we find with survivors and victims of domestic abuse, they might not have access to like their bank accounts and stuff like that, so that they can't leave, for example. So they might be stuck in a relationship. Somebody might be preventing them from working, so they can't earn an income. So there's different kind of ways. So under each type, there'll be different tactics that perpetrators use to control and exert power.
And these are all kind of things that, if you aren't in that position, and if you're in a stable relationship and a mindset where you cannot understand how somebody can be so victimized, it really is difficult for people to be able to empathize with the victims, isn't it? Because you see, I find myself doing it sometimes watching the soaps. I know they're fictional, but they're very close to reality for so many people in these kind of storylines, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. Recently I don't have TV, but I hear people talking about some of the like EastEnders, some of the storylines, and they've been pretty much really close to, you know, the writers do speak obviously to like Women's Aid and stuff like that, and survivors. Where I work at the moment, I'm a consultant for outside of Bambuuu. I'm a consultant for an organisation and a pioneer for them. So they get approached all the time to do like media work and stuff. So I think media is taking a bigger interest in it. I think COVID's been a massive factor in that of over the last year, because domestic abuse has just escalated, because obviously people have been locked in with their partners or with their family members. So they've not been able to get out and get help, or, you know, it's like you say, if you're in a relationship, and it could be with domestic abuse, it can escalate. So it could be the person starts off by just saying, why are you always on your phone? And then it escalates to the point where you're not allowed to be on your phone, or you might feel you've been manipulated to the point where you don't want to go on your phone. So it's like the person hasn't even told you to not go on your phone, but because you don't want that person saying you're always on your phone, then you don't go on your phone. So there's control there. And what we have is a model which we call the Duluth model. It's the power and control wheel. And that looks at all these different types of tactics that people will use to exert power and control over another person. So obviously with domestic abuse, it's not just the partner. It's not just, it could be a family member. So we're seeing an increase in like children abusing their parents, even killing their parents. That's domestic abuse as well. So it's not just the types that sometimes people get a bit lost in. It's also who the perpetrators might be, because I think sometimes with domestic abuse, people think, oh, it's to do with the partner, when actually, you know, my 21-year-old son could be my perpetrator. My 16-year-old daughter could be my perpetrator, because it can be linked to a family member. And also we know in some communities, and this kind of happened a little bit with me as well, where family members get involved as well. So you might not say anything because you don't want the family members coming after you too, because that's also domestic abuse, where the community or the family come up against the victim.
So you say about the Domestic Abuse Act. I'm sure it must be a really wide umbrella that covers, to the point that there must be a sliding scale of penalties and punishment, and again, as you say, without seeing the bruises, how do you say to someone with, you know, this is your sentence or whatever? How does that work? Is it something that you can just share in a few words?
Not really in a few words, Andy, but
well, not a few words, as many as it needs.
What we have, what we use a tool. So basically we have like an assessment tool. It's called a dash RIC. So there's, I can't remember the numbers of questions. I think it's like 27. I haven't got it in front of me, but it's just basically a yes and no tick questionnaire. So it will say, are you frightened? Have you ever been strangled? Has the perpetrator ever used a weapon? And that, you know, a weapon doesn't just mean a gun or a knife. It could be thrown a remote control at you. So this assessment is done with a professional, but you can do it by yourself. I've done it by myself, and it gives you a ranking of the level of risk you are at. So if you score a particular amount, you'll be seen as like standard risk, then it goes to medium, then it goes to high, and high risk is high risk of significant injury or death. So what we know is that depending on like the severity of the abuse will depend on the consequence for the perpetrator. So going to court, I mean, a lot of victims and survivors don't report to the police. And when they do, it can be really difficult because the courts are not really trauma informed. The courts have got a lot of measures and things in place. So you could go to court and not use the same entrance. You could be behind a screen. You could have a support worker in there with you. But I think because of like lack of legal aid. Domestic abuse survivors, they say, can get legal aid, but if for someone like me, I couldn't get legal aid because I worked. So it's like representing, not having necessarily the legal advice initially, because it might be, for example, somebody just wants to get what in old money people call injunctions. So like a non-molestation order or restraining order. And there's different ways to get those. So a restraining order is if the police have got involved and the CPS have pressed charges, and then the courts can give you a restraining order. But if there's no criminal charges, you can go down a civil route and get a non-molestation order. But they can be quite difficult to get as well. I'm not trying to put anybody off. Try and get as many protective measures in place to protect yourself and keep yourself safe. But it's still, there's lots of barriers there. Wow. And then once you get to court, it can be quite, as I said, a traumatic experience. So perpetrators, we've seen this before, we've been to court, and they'll walk out of court with really no penalty and then just continue with the same behavior. Mm-hmm. So for a survivor, it's like, what's the point? I'm not even going to report to the police because I've just gone through this whole procedure and it's been stressful.
And then they're probably worse off at the other end because it just escalates the issues. Paulette is saying, didn't I hear that there have been recent convictions for economic control?
I don't know off the top of them. I know there have, but I don't know the case names. But yes, there definitely has, and for coercion as well. So these things are getting more known about. The courts are getting a better understanding of these types of abuse. But we've still got a long way to go. And the response, I think, is coming more from like the support side of things. Rather than the enforcement side. So we can see there's lots of services that are getting involved and trying to help survivors with the economical abuse. So for example, some banks are understanding now that if you've got a joint bank account, for example, that sometimes has put women at risk if they've tried to flee, because banks there might be barriers and stuff like that. So banks are getting better on not sharing particular information. We could also online stuff as well. That's just massive. Like women have been located through like eating apps, like Just Eat. So if you fled and you go to order a pizza, for example, and you put your address in and you've got the same passwords, perpetrators can get in and see where that pizza's been ordered and then know where you are. So there's lots of, when we talk about safety planning, we have to kind of go really deep, because the tactics some perpetrators will go to get to
find you, to access you. Wow, that's deep. I got to say thank you to Pogwash, who's just joining us and shared the stream and liked the video. Thank you very much, brother. Now you made a point earlier, and it sparked something in my mind, because you know I was brought up in the 70s, and as you say, it wasn't so much that it was accepted, but it was kind of the norm. So maybe I guess it was accepted. It was commonplace, and women were seen to have a place, and you know, this is how you behave, and you know your place, and you don't talk out of line. And the same with the kids. We used to joke about it. It got to the point I was just getting old enough where you would hear kids saying, "I'm going to report you if you hit me. You know, I'm going to take you to the police," because then and everyone was saying, "No, it's political madness gone wrong. You can't even hit your children anymore." But as time progresses, those lines get blurred, and children's safety gets called up. I'm basically just saying the evolution of these things. It gets to a point where what was once accepted is no longer accepted, and it's frowned upon. Is that purely because of experience and people learning from the mistakes of the past? The same, I guess, with a totally different subject altogether, but you watch a program from the 1970s and some of the language regarding racism, for example, you think, how on earth was that accepted? But then it's the same with domestic abuse, I would assume.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's through a lot of campaigning, a lot of awareness groups and stuff like that happening, and just I think women are, because in terms of stats, like I said, in terms of the we know that men are victims of domestic abuse, and the numbers kind of fluctuate, but in general it kind of teeters out like 1 in 6 men experience domestic abuse. But where it changes is in that level of risk. So once you get to high risk, it's something, it goes about between 95 and 98% of high risk victims are female. So it's I think a lot of the women's services and women are just saying, no, we're not having this. Like, we've got more of a voice now. Back in the 70s, like my mum, she didn't have anywhere to go. Nobody really listened to her. And it was complete victim blaming. That still definitely happens today. We're still having this conversation because everybody just wants the victim to sort it out. She needs to leave. In terms of protecting children, I see, for me, children are victims of domestic abuse too. They're survivors of domestic. If they're witnessing it, even if they're in the room next door and they've heard something, they are a victim of domestic abuse. But what happens is, if it's their mum, their mother is expected, or even if it's their dad and social care get involved, we expect the victim to take on the lead of protecting not only yourself, but their children. So we will say, you need to leave him and you need to come away. And the perpetrator is just kind of wandering around with no consequences. So we've still got a lot of conversations to be had. Yes, it's a lot better than the 70s because it is unacceptable. It's unacceptable to hit your children. Just because we said it then doesn't mean it was okay. It wasn't okay then. We just thought it kind of was, but it wasn't. And it isn't today. So there's so much work to be done. And the racism, I mean, that's another, I need another show for that one, Andy, to be fair. I'm not even going to go there with you. But I just, for me, again, that hasn't changed. I just think it's different. It's done differently. I've received so much racial racism online. I was told to go and pick cotton, a couple of months ago. So for me, what has changed, I just think not really that much. And I'm not trying to be negative. It's just about what's the solutions? Like it's still happening. I'm not going to deny that, we've seen during COVID, domestic abuse, as some of these helplines they've had like hundreds more phone calls per day. I've tried to get through to helplines to help people to get into refuge, for example. It took us days to get through. We had someone homeless for 3 days because we couldn't get through to the helpline to find refuge. So for me, it's still a massive issue. That's why we need to continue to have these conversations and these campaigns to end it. I don't know whether it will end in my lifetime. I think it will improve because, like you said, we have got like the Domestic Abuse Act, which has gone through. We have got more funding for services. But there's still that's just the start of it. Like, they should have been doing this from years ago. So that's my kind of take on it.
Well, Cliff, we talk about men being victims of domestic abuse. Cliff Williams is a gentleman who supports a lot of the shows that we do. He says he's not ashamed to admit he suffered verbal abuse in his marriage, and he had the strength to walk out back in 2000 and leave it all behind him. And Debbie, Curly Deb, also saying it used to be perfectly acceptable for a man to beat his wife or wife-in-law. Now, as I say, times have changed. It's incredible. I personally have witnessed so many stories. I could talk for days on this topic. Without going too deep about it, I'm sure we've all got experiences across so many different spectrums. Let's focus then, coming back on a point. We had a conversation yesterday because I needed to make sure that I was getting the lowdown and getting all the information. Let's focus on your efforts and your own focus on addressing black women and women of colour, the specifics of why you feel that is not only important but essential.
I believe it is essential because, like I said, to end domestic abuse, everyone has to be involved in the conversation. And I believe at the moment, not everybody's involved, not everyone's at the table. In the UK, a lot of the domestic abuse services are kind of traditional. They're set up, as I said before in the show, for those that have just joined, they're set up from a Eurocentric point of view, and not even necessarily from a young people's point of view. So there's a lot of people that are not necessarily having their voices heard when it comes to this campaign and service provision for ending domestic abuse and being safe from it. So Bambuuu, we are just a grassroots organisation. We're really small. We've set up some self-help sessions which are online because of COVID at the minute. So with domestic abuse, there's particular like programs that are set up for men and women, but mainly women go onto them. And some of your viewers might have heard it. It's called the Freedom Program. So we feel that program, for example, doesn't necessarily look at the ins and outs of the barriers that some people face, such as Black women. So we offer dedicated sessions for all women, but specialising in looking at the barriers and how we can overcome and be resilient for women of colour and Black women. We've also got young people sessions as well, which have been really successful. And some people are like, why are young people like having this conversation? Well, of course they should be having this conversation because they might have been a victim of domestic abuse with their parents, for example, or grandparents or someone in their family, but also for their own relationships. So we have set up a group for young women. The majority of those are Black girls and girls of colour. And it's really to say, yeah, we want to be we want to be included. And what we would like to see, so for example, if somebody contacts that helpline or phones social care and says, I need help, we believe that there should be a choice where that person gets help from. It shouldn't just be one service where they might struggle to engage because they don't see anybody that looks like them. There's no one there that understands their language. There's no one who's had the training to understand the culture and the barriers that they face. So we are saying, well, we understand that ourselves because we are from these communities. So we can do it. We've got the expertise in supporting women in domestic abuse, but we've also got the lived experience of being Black women and women of colour. So we straight off kind of know what we're doing, basically. So we're saying we've got the expertise. So why shouldn't that woman have a choice? And we just feel like women will engage better initially and for a longer period of time. And like I said, we are very much about recovery. The reason Bambuuu is called Bambuuu is because it takes 7 years for a bamboo to shoot up. It shoots up 7 feet. And it takes a lot of nurturing, a lot of love and care. And so for us, it's that recovery from domestic abuse as well, not just the crisis intervention, getting involved and getting them safe. What happens after that? And for a lot of Black women who might be part of a particular community, to then they'll say, well, I'm not going to come out of my community and go into a refuge. And they might have to go into a refuge, which is, again, Eurocentric, and they might not have access to their foods or to the mosque or to skincare and stuff, wherever the refuge might be. So it's about us having these conversations. Also, we spoke about the courts. We know that the journey that a Black woman or a woman of colour goes through is completely different to that of a white survivor sometimes. So even getting the police to listen to her story, if she has that courage to go to the police, because like me, I grew up in a community where you do not grass, you do not say anything, you don't talk to the police. So to even get to that point, you know, that is a different set of barriers that maybe a white woman from a kind of elite area, a middle or upper class area, might not have any qualms in contacting the police and going to court. Whereas for someone like me, who's from a working class background, who's been taught you do not grass, simple. It's a
I
complete,
think that also would be the same for many white women as well, from poorer and
yeah,
working
definitely.
class backgrounds.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. But we know that is, we know with the police, we can see from like George Floyd, like the barriers that the certain communities face with the police. I've had it myself. When I went to court, I just was not given a lot of support from the court. There was a lot of barriers there. So for me, and I know this system, I work in it. I can speak the language. People would say I'm middle class now with the job that I do. Yet I still struggled because they didn't see that. They saw the colour of my skin first. That's how I felt.
Hmm.
So, you know, there are barriers there. And it's different. It's different in this country where we're the minority. When we're having, you know, for me to go to speak to a white police officer, a person in authority, that conjures up particular triggers for me. And
It beggars belief, really, that we're still having this conversation in 2021.
well, we are, Andy. So yeah, it's hard and it's tough, and you know, not all black women are gonna say that's my experience, but from the majority that we've spoken to and have experience of working with, that it's a very similar conversation we're having with the barriers that they're facing.
Hmm.
So you know, it's a shame that we're still here, but we are.
Mm.
And that's why Bambuuu is trying to redress it. So we have got, as I said, the self help groups. We offer one-to-one support with safety planning, and one of the things that we offer as well is training for businesses, because especially during COVID, like a lot of people have been working from home, and that, as I said, poses additional risks, and people didn't think about this. So people didn't think, like, you do your health and safety risk assessments at work, but actually when you're working from home, there's potential risk there for survivors and victims of domestic abuse. So it's for training for businesses.
That's
A lot of
interesting.
businesses have like mental health first aiders. So we're saying, well, there should be domestic abuse first aiders. Not as well for the perpetrators, because a lot of perpetrators work. So it's an avenue to get in there to help stop domestic abuse, because perpetrators need to be part of this conversation too, because there's hardly any kind of, when you talked about consequences, it's not just about consequences, it's about the support that they get, because they might have witnessed domestic abuse as children, so think it's
So
acceptable.
the cycle continues. So
Precisely.
do you think there needs to be more awareness then of, because people might be exerting certain actions, they might have certain ways that they behave that they believe themselves, they genuinely believe is acceptable, and to see something on paper or to see a documentary, for example, that labels them as an abuser, they would step back and go, whoa, hold on a minute, because there must be some people in that situation, not
Oh
every,
yeah,
you know,
there's a lot of people in that situation.
but that could be woken up from it, so to speak. They're not, you know, downright dirty, nasty people. They can change. So
Oh
maybe
yeah, definitely,
more awareness.
definitely. There's it's. I mean, when I was a social worker, there was particular courses like anger management, but we know with perpetrators, they can control their anger around other people.
Yeah.
But when it comes to, for example, their victim, they can't control themselves. So we kind of scrapped that idea that was an anger management problem. So some of the courses they have running at the moment, like probation have courses, building better relationships. But what we have to consider when people, if it's just like, well, not just, but the person you've just described, then I would say it's pretty safe for them to go on a course and learn more about their behaviours, which
Mm-hmm.
may be harming their victim, so in an effort to stop. But then we have like some people that the high risk perpetrators, they can still get help, and there's projects and there's initiatives out there. But alongside that, the victim and the survivors need to be supported, because sometimes some perpetrators do courses and they learn different tactics. For example, they'll say, oh, I've gone on a course, so I'm all right now. no, you're not. You've just gone on the course for the wrong reasons. You haven't gone on the course to change. You might have gone on the course to manipulate your victim into staying with you, for example. Right. So we have to be really careful. Perpetrators have to be part of this conversation 100%. And I've done things in my life that I'm not proud of, and I've had to do a lot of self-discovery and look at myself so that I can make changes. So I would not say people are not able to change. Far from it. I know a lot of people that are perpetrators, and I'm a hopeful person. I just think with the right type of support, again, it can't be no quick fix. It's got to be long-term recovery. So yeah, for me, perpetrators, I don't even necessarily that term, even perpetrator. So there are some different ways and language. It's about the language we speak. So it could be, for example, a person that displays abusive behaviors rather than a perpetrator. Because if someone was calling me a perpetrator, I would shut straight down. Mm-hmm. So, but for somebody who, if you think, and I'm sure some of the viewers as well, have we been around people and say, oh, I said that and did that? I've got friends where we've had conversations or, mates, and they've gone, I did this. And I'm like, whoa, you shouldn't have done that. Or sometimes I've been around people that have gone, oh, they told me they did this and I didn't say anything. But it's like those moments where it's not just about support us as a community, us as in our friendship circles, offering suggestions around, harmful behaviors. So that's, for me, I think definitely they can be part of the conversation, and there's things that can be done.
You're very optimistic with your outlook on society, because some people just, you can't have that conversation with some people, can you? And so it's, as I say, the optimism within you and the positivity, you can really see that, and the think that, everything can be amended somehow.
I think it can. I was a child walking around homeless, sofa surfing with my mum, sleeping on park benches. For me, I can't not think this world can be better than that. I can't be part of that world. Like, I just think things can be better for people. And I'd rather think in a positive way than a negative. I know there's going to be the hardline ones that there's no chance. I've come across, I've tried to help people, and there's been the odd one I'm like, no, sorry, this person definitely needs to be locked away indefinitely because it's something that cannot be fixed. Mm-hmm. But as I say, that's been far and few between. It's just been an anomaly, really. For me, I just think there's always hope, and I just think we all want that sense of belonging, and you mentioned the word comfort. When I worked with young people, a lot of the young people I worked with, it was they went into gangs, violent gangs, because they wanted that sense of belonging. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's just there's always something we can do to support and help people away from those sort of behaviors and circumstances, but it's not just at a whim. It takes a long time to recover from that. If mm-hmm. you've been behaving that way for a period of time, a long period of time, it's a habit, isn't it? So you need to recover, and for me, it's about that self-discovery very much.
You hear it so many times about love-hate relationships, can't live with them, can't live without them scenarios. It's a conversation that could go on for hours and hours. And I mean, we've covered a hell of a lot of ground. Is there anything else that you wanted to focus on, or shall we have a talk about how people can reach out to you, or where you would recommend people start looking for, if they want to start making a change?
I think the only thing I haven't really spoken about, I'll just add quickly.
I'm in no rush. Take your time. Talk as long as you want.
Is like Stockholm syndrome, which is a psychological condition, and that is something we use in the domestic abuse sector as well. And we see it in, like, with prisoners of wars, or if someone's been kidnapped, where they form positive attachments to the abuser. And with you just saying about that love-hate, and I think, you know, me personally, with my lived experience and my professional experience, I feel like it's not a kind of simple as love hate kind of thing. It's very psychological. So I just wanted to just throw that in there. But yeah, sorry, Andy, I'll move on to the next part. What was the
No,
question?
just again, that's something I'll be quite happy to focus on, because I've experienced it a lot for many years of my life. Relationships where you question how people can remain together, but it's very detrimental to both parties. And it comes back to what the point that I made at the beginning, is that unless you've experienced it, it's very difficult to empathize and to feel and to understand how that can be part of someone's life. I
Yeah.
don't know if I've actually made any kind of point there.
No, I understand, and I've had that same experience. And again, for me, from my lived experience, it was I'd literally formed an attachment to my abuser, and it wasn't a healthy attachment. And I think it's that bonding, and we hear this term trauma bonding.
Uh,
So,
as you said that, Wendy Sheehan has literally just come onto the comment and said trauma bond.
yes. Was
Well,
it Wendy? Yes,
yeah.
Wendy.
Well,
Yes,
thank you, Wendy.
definitely, 100% trauma bonding.
Hmm.
So it's deep. This is deep stuff, and the main point really is that we have to be safe. And I know myself, I've been in situations where I've felt completely unsafe, and I've been completely unsafe, and still been there, and really struggled to get away from it. It took, you know, they say there's particular amount of attempts. There's again statistics. One place on average they say like 7 attempts to leave, 7 incidents or 7 attempts to leave.
An abusive relationship.
Yeah, and you know it's going to be different for everybody, but I just think for me, in my experience, working with survivors, the majority have been women. They've suffered, you know, that psychological element, that control. So how and maybe have become dependent or codependent. So it's like, how do you? It's not as easy to just say. For some people, it is. Some people can just go, no, not having that, and they've got these boundaries in place and can just go. But what we deal with in our work, the majority of the survivors and victims really struggle to break that bond.
Hmm.
It's difficult, especially if you've got children, for example, and you still have to have contact with the abusive, with the perpetrator or the person causing the abuse in your life, because you have children with that
Hmm.
person. So you relive that trauma every time you see them when your children are having contact. So it's not as cut and dry as just leaving. It's some survivors, and well, I say majority, find it really painful and difficult and challenging, and especially when there's hardly any services out there. Like for men, I think we haven't got many male refuges for transsexuals and transgender. There's hardly any refuge safe spaces across the UK. There's hardly any refuges for Black women and women of colour. So yeah, it's difficult. But it can be done. I've done it. I've got out. So do it. I'll say don't stick it to it. Just break the
Brilliant.
habit.
Well,
If it's the habit.
so let's give people some directions as to how they can reach out to you, or they can
Yeah,
read up on
so
more.
we have got a website which is www.bambuuu.co, and it's bamboo with 3 U's as well. So bambuuu.co.uk, and we've got a Facebook page, and it's Bambuuu, again spelt the same way, Domestic Abuse Services. We've also got a closed group which is just for survivors and victims, which you can find if you go to our Facebook page. So there's myself, Marsha, who are the admins of that group, and they're there to offer support too.
While you're talking, I'm just going to go over and take the website address and just
Thank you
and
so
just
much.
I just paste it
I
into
was gonna
the
say, can
window.
anybody that knows me, if anybody's watching, can you just post it in there? There's also like obviously Bambuuu is for women and girls, but there's helplines for men. So I've got the men's advice line. So I could give you that to type in, Andy.
Mm-hmm.
So that number is, are you ready?
Yeah.
0808
Yeah.
801
Yeah.
0327.
And what's this for? Again, sorry, I wasn't listening.
That's the men's advice line.
Okay.
And then there's Gallup, which is the national helpline for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender.
So Gallup is the national
helpline for LGBT.
LGBT, yeah.
And that number is 0800 999 5428.
Yep.
And then there's the domestic abuse national helpline. And their number is 0808 2000 247. And just to point out that Bambuuu covers the East Midlands, and I know some of your listeners won't just be from there. That's why I wanted to give those other numbers as well. Mm-hmm. So Bambuuu at the moment is covering Nottingham and Derby predominantly, but we are open to anyone from the East Midlands in the UK
to reach out and help. Well, I just also see a comment here from Nikki. Thank you for commenting, Nikki. Thank you for being here, and anyone else that's passed through. And so, considering when we began, you didn't really know where we were going to go with these conversations.
We've been everywhere, Andy.
60 minutes later, we've had a quite deep, interesting conversation. I think you've presented everything so incredibly, and I know a lot of people are going to be coming back to watch this and get some important information, and maybe more importantly, when they have conversations with some of their friends and family, they'll draw reference to this and point them in the direction to watch the video as well. It's definitely food for thought, and along this journey I always enjoy meeting interesting people, and I'll bring you on and we'll talk about some of those other topics that I know you want to fix the world.
100%. Yeah, that'll be great.
Okay, thank you so very much for being here, and I am going to just say a few goodbyes to everyone, and I'll drop you a message later. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. And Dawn goes. That was great, wasn't it? Right, let me see if that... Yes, it did. It did work. I remembered to press the buttons today. I asked a question that you would have seen when you joined the stream. Do you know someone directly who has been a victim of domestic abuse? The results are quite astounding. No, 8%. Yes, 92%. So it speaks for itself, doesn't it, really? Thank you for being here. I thank everybody that has given me likes and shares on the video. You can see here down the left-hand side, I even got a little share myself. To all my Access members, thank you very much for being a part of this. It's your help, your contribution that enables me to get all these little tools. And if anyone else wants to show their support, there is a link where you can do so. I'll just leave that there for you to think about. Angel is with us. Thank you for being here, Angel. I'm not sure how much of the conversation you caught, but I recommend you go back and check it all if you didn't take it all in. And thank you, Cynthia, for commenting. Thank you, Paulette. And again, I'm sorry for getting your name, Navaya. Again, forgive me for saying that wrong. As you can see on the screen, top left-hand corner, 2 weeks' time, we do these talks every 2 weeks, inspire and be inspired, motivational conversation and life hacks. It can be any topic. If you've got something you'd like me to talk about, if you've got someone you'd like me to talk to, or if you'd like to join me, I'll be more than welcome. I'll be more than happy to welcome you onto the stream and provide the platform for you. 2 weeks' time, on the 29th of June, we have got Jason Olner, aka Doobie J. Now, pretty much all of the Vocal Booth family know who Doobie J is. An incredibly inspiring gentleman, and he's going to be telling us how he overcame his disability to become an international DJ and a producer, amongst many other things. So that's in 2 weeks' time. I will leave it there now. 60 minutes into tonight's stream. Thank you, everybody, and I am sure I'm going to go offline as more people are commenting. So thank you all. Thank you, Cliff. Respect for being here, brother. And again, thank you for watching the video. I'll see you soon, folks. Take care.